Hello, I'm Barbara Peters from the Poison Pen, Scottsdale's Mystery Bookstore, welcoming you to another episode in our ever-crowded criminal calendar. We have with us today one of my favorite people, Dana Stabenow from Anchorage, who the first time she came here was unwise enough to come in June, which nearly terminated your career as a mystery writer.
103 degrees, and you promised it would be nothing of the kind.
Well, June can be treacherous, and I remember how absolutely miserable you were, and it must indeed be very difficult if you live in Alaska to bust out and go down to the desert.
Well, when it gets to be 80 degrees at home, I start to whine. So you may imagine, and I'm sure you remember just how whiny I was that June.
Well, I wouldn't say you were whiny. I would say you were very uncomfortable. And here we are in an El Nino year when we've been freezing all winter. You're probably absolutely delighted with this beautiful spring day.
Yes, it's lovely.
I'm showing off my tan from Hawaii. And I mentioned that because, interestingly enough, I think I mentioned to you earlier we were having lunch. I'm just back from Hawaii where we stayed at a macadamia nut farm. And lo and behold, at breakfast, discovered that the gentleman at the table is a huge fan of yours and has been to your book signings in Anchorage. He was down in Hawaii celebrating some sort of spring solstice, or at least getting out of the dark.
He's running from the slush is what he was doing. I know what he was doing there.
Well, I had just read your last and what I consider to be your sort of caper book, Breakup.
Yes.
Fabulous book.
Thank you. The reader feedback on Breakup has been phenomenal. I've never had such response from a book before. I'm still getting letters, and I imagine now they're going to increase now that it's come out in paperback. It's just, God, if I'd known, I would have written that book first.
It's so funny, but I had no idea there was this spring thaw madness that seems to overtake animal and people.
Well, my standard line is, of course, Breakup isn't really that bad. It's worse.
Well, if the grizzlies were any hungrier or any more, it really is a delightful book, and I'll come back to it because one thing that I found very interesting the other night when I was talking to my crime fiction class at Arizona State, we were discussing capers. And I was pointing out that in a list of caper writers that I had read off to the class and that we had discussed, people like Larry Block and Larry Shames and Don Westlake and all, there were no women.
Oh, dear.
And then I thought, casting about, surely there is a book I can think of that I would describe as a caper written by a woman, and the only one that I thought of was Breakup.
Well, that's pretty good company to be keeping.
It really is.
Yeah.
But it is interesting how few women do, there are not that many thrillers, spy stories, or capers written by women.
Breakup came out after the Sturm und Drang of Blood Will Tell. I wanted to sort of lighten things up a little bit, and that's basically how Breakup came about. Also, when I sat down to write it, an Evergreen 747 lost an engine over East Anchorage, and by a miracle didn't kill anyone, but I thought, aha, how interesting that would be if it landed in the front of Kate's yard. So,
when the bears weren't tearing her off the airplanes were going to scrape her. Well, it reveals something that does come out in your other books, which is your wonderful sense of humor.
Oh, thank you.
And also an ability to put complex pieces together, because a caper really does demand, that you have a lot of balls in play, a lot of people, and a lot of plots, lots of elements, and getting them all together is really kind of what you hope for. Not so much, who did it, is will they get away with it, and will it all coalesce? And I thought that was certainly true with Breakup.
Well, thank you. I'm particularly fond of the D6 Caterpillar tractor, actually. That's my favorite part of the whole book. She manages to scare off the villain and to settle a local argument all at one go and have one hell of a ride while she's at it.
I like the grizzly. Is sow the right word for a female grizzly?
Yeah, it is. Sow and boar, yes. There are people out there who will say, no, it's a male grizzly and a female grizzly, and that's all that there is to that. But they are in common usage. You can say sow and boar.
So when they wake up, they're just as cross, mean, and cranky
they're
as
hungry,
people.
And they're hungry too. They've been sleeping for 6 months. They want to eat, and if you happen to cross their path, you look pretty good to them.
Well, let's go back to the beginning. Are you a native Alaskan?
I was born in Alaska, and I've lived there all my life. Went to school there. Probably will never live anywhere else. Can't imagine living anywhere else.
Do you have any Aleut blood or Inuit blood?
No, no, I'm not an Aleut, but I'm informed by my Aleut family that I'm adopted. So I was raised with a half Aleut, half Filipino family in Saldovia, which is where the Aleuts come from in my books.
You were?
Mm-hmm.
How come?
Well, my mother and my father split up when I was very young, and my mother was a deckhand on a fish tender, and then we sort of, went where the boat went and wound up in Saldovia. And in fifth grade, I think it was fifth grade, I just met up with Kathy, whose mother's maiden name is Shugak, which is a good Aleut name from Old Harbor and Kodiak Island. And her mother, she lived with her father, and she hadn't, had anything to do with her mother for a long time, so she just sort of adopted my mother, and I sort of adopted her father, and the families just blended.
Well, I wondered, because you write with such authenticity about the feelings and the intricacies of the tribe, and Kate's network, of relatives and all that. I thought perhaps I thought you were brought up in them, but I wasn't sure why.
I was, and that's why. Kathy's all her life made a habit of bringing home strays, and I believe that I have the honor to be her first.
When you started out, did you expect such a colony of Alaskan writers to arise?
Well, no. It's
a lot of you.
No kidding, and more. It seems like every day, and people writing in the. It's almost like a sub genre of Alaskan mysteries. I find that. I don't know. Maybe it's because I live there and because I'm so close to it that I find it amazing that we can find so much to write about it. But I remember Sue Henry and I had a conversation one time, and we agreed that even if we wrote the same book on the same subject, they would be two completely different books because we were two completely different writers.
Yeah, and it's an enormous state. I mean, it could just as easily be a country.
Yes.
So
very. Yes, it's about a fifth the size of the rest of the United States. If you overlay a map of Alaska over a map of the contiguous 48 states, the map of Alaska will overlap both borders and both coasts. I've been taught in universities across the country here recently, most recently at DeVry University in Atlanta, and one of the students emailed me and with the question as to the size of the state, and I said, do me a favor, overlap a map of Alaska over a map of the South 48, both same scale, and put it up and show it to your class. Well, evidently this was a revelation to them, and these were college students. This is what I find most appalling. They had no idea. Well, most people look at for relative size of the states, they look at the weather map, and they think Alaska is about the same size of Hawaii, and it's located off the southwest coast of California.
Yeah, I was going to say, I think that the way the map projections work mitigates against Alaska getting anything like its fair share. I remember you and I tore up Anchorage one glorious Sunday, which was just a red letter day. In fact, it was you and Sue Henry and I.
Yes, it was the three of us.
It's a wonderful place to beat the heat. You like to come down perhaps when winter's dark has gotten to you and enjoy the sun in Scottsdale, but when it's hot here in summer, Alaska truly beckons.
Glad to hear it. Come on up.
I'd like to come back very much. One of the things that I thought was the most exciting and wonderful was how close you can become to sort of nature rid in tooth and claw.
Yes, you can.
Just even from a cruise ship, you get such sailing Sitka Bay and finding a bald eagle on virtually every tree. Mm-hmm. My husband caught a 40 or 50 pound salmon and could feed the ship for lunch. That kind of thing was so wonderful. Mm-hmm. It must be very exciting for you living there.
Well, it's certainly one of the charms, and one of the things that I and most rooted Alaskans find so amusing is when someone moves up from outside and they, buy a house on hillside which backs right up against the Chugach State Park, where there is a great deal of wildlife to be had, and which very frequently wanders through your yard when you have a house on hillside. Anyway, this one particular gentleman I'm thinking of built a 6-foot fence and then imported a bunch of very delicate shrubs and trees, and may I say also very expensive shrubs and trees, and nurtured them and cosseted them and coddled them and loved them and encouraged them to grow in this foreign environment. And then moose came along and jumped the fence one winter and ate them all.
Oh, no.
And he wrote a very indignant letter to the Anchorage Daily News, which prompted, I would conservatively estimate, about 3 months worth of letters in response, laughing at him. I'm sure he's sorry. I'm sure he's very sorry he ever wrote that letter.